All right, let me just close this window real quick because New York don't stop for nobody. All right, ready? We're good? My name is Anthony Rondinone. I'm an artist from the Bronx. Mainly I'm painting abstract portraits to try to get out certain emotions that, because of where I'm from, I feel like I couldn't get out in my childhood and honestly for most of my life. So I'm finding ways to express things that I have felt and that I'm feeling now that I have the ability to feel them. I was in a touring band for like 10 years, and that was the way that I was getting what I wanted to get out. I was writing music, lyrically, we're talking about certain things. We stopped touring in about 2015. In that year, somebody close to me had died. And for some reason, I was like, oh, I'm gonna paint something. Like, he just passed away, and I just felt like painting something, so I wanted to paint a portrait of him. And the first one I painted, I didn't really like. It didn't feel like my relationship with him, and it didn't capture like his soul. So I painted something else, and I loved it. And just the whole process, I was like thinking about my relationship with him and like who he was as a person and how he felt, like what his like soul felt like. This was such a healing process for me. Like, it just felt so good to reflect on what he meant to the world and what he meant to me. And people who knew him saw it and they like loved it. Like, it was just such a nice memorial to like capture his essence almost. Taking a few hours to myself and just like reflecting about something. I never really did that in the past. I think I never had time to like reflect on events or relationships or things that I was thinking about. So it was really kind of the first time that I really was reflecting on how I genuinely felt about something or someone. And I just wanted to like replicate that process. So I just started painting more, and I didn't know what I was painting. I was just painting like just other random figures. And what was coming out was how I felt about certain things. It was a lot of like dark, monochromatic, black and white, just these dark, like melancholy figures. And I knew it was coming from somewhere. I didn't know exactly where or why, but it had to be something inside of me. So these things just kept coming out, and I just was like trying to think more and more about like what they meant to me. And then I just started pushing it more. I started like experimenting more and thinking about more subjects that I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to just aimlessly paint things that were coming out of my head. I wanted to actually be like intentional and explicit about, you know, what do I want to say? So that's when I started to think about where I'm from and like, what do I want to get out to the world about where I'm from and like what this means to people. Yeah, the Bronx is a crazy, fun, vibrant place. I really don't know how to describe it. It's like going to a carnival, almost. You know, like, there's just so much going on. It's almost hard to take it in sometimes. You get on a bus and it's just hitting potholes and people are screaming in your ear and people are honking at you, there's smoke coming in your face. Like, it's just everything. It's just constant congestion, constant chaos and like confusion, and everybody's living like that. Everybody has a different, just, yeah, wacky personality. You know, it's like people are loud, people are yelling, people are laughing, people are funny, people are getting into other people's business in like the funniest way, like, and it's like, it's beautiful in some ways.
How old is she? Nice. I want to like try to help like teach kids in the Bronx how to paint or like kind of like express themselves, you know what I'm saying?
It's almost like you need a way to like stick out among the crowd because there's so many people, there's so many noises and things happening and lights, and finding a way to stick out amongst all of this chaos, it's like creates these characters that stick out. And then you have the other side of it that's like dirty and violent and dangerous, a lot of drug addiction, a lot of stress, depression, mental health issues. It's a place that you have the ultimate freedom in some ways to express who you are and how you feel, and yet you kind of don't express any of it in some ways. Almost all of this yelling and loud and confusion and chaos almost like masks how you actually feel. The feeling that I have from my childhood is like a weight constantly just bearing down. Like the buildings are oppressive, they're always over you. There's just like a weight of financial stress and worry. When you have that weight and when you're living in a certain type of struggle, you don't have the luxury to allow yourself to feel sad about something. Let's say like there's not really time to just stop and like cry or like vent about certain things. Like you just have to keep going. There's like other stuff to worry about that's like way more pressing. And I think allowing yourself to feel certain emotions is a luxury. And I almost think people aren't even aware of how they actually feel. My whole childhood, even through like teenage years, you almost like numb out what you actually feel. You're not even aware that you feel certain things, because I think if you let yourself feel what you could be feeling, it would just be unbearable. I think that closing yourself off manifests itself in different ways. So I think it comes out in certain addictions or certain anger or just different, probably unhealthy ways. For me, I don't even think I was aware of them for most of my life because I just couldn't feel these things. But I always felt like there was something unsaid, or I felt like there was something I needed to get out or say, and it would find different ways to come out. I think that's kind of a special thing about New York too. I think that's why you see like graffiti artists coming out of New York and like rappers and musicians, and you do have like this really beautiful art because I think this pressure does find places to get out. It almost like the artists in New York are like the cracks. You know, it's like a crack in a sidewalk where like a tree grows up from. You know, it's like surrounded by concrete, but then once in a while you'll have a crack in the sidewalk where like a tree will come out of. And I feel like those cracks are the artists. And they're kind of telling the story of what it really feels like, what we're going through, you know, what people in the Bronx and people in cities like this are going through. And now that I'm more aware of like how I do feel and how maybe I should have felt as a kid, and what I want other people to feel or to see or to recognize, it's like okay to feel these things. And I think I'm just trying to express those things now that I have like the ability to. And I started thinking about Sesame Street, and like the whole look of Sesame Street looks like a neighborhood in New York or in the Bronx. It's kind of dirty, like you have a guy who lives in garbage, you have another guy who's like addicted to cookies. So like each of these characters started to represent different people that I grew up with or that I saw in the Bronx. And then they're all also just like wacky characters. Like we were up on Fordham Road today and you see just like everybody is just like loud and like it's just a wacky place. Like when you really step back and look at it, it's unlike any place on earth, I feel like. So it really does remind me of Sesame Street in some way, like these cartoon characters that are just over the top and like just ridiculous. And I love it. And that's the like the fun, light side of the Bronx. It's just like such fun people and like everybody's curious and there's almost like this childlike feeling of it. But then there is like this underlying kind of sadness and realness and like depression and anxiety and addiction that I can talk about through some of these characters. So like Cookie Monster, for instance, reminds me of a drug addict that used to live on my corner. You know, and like people just walk right by him. You don't really think anything of it. You kind of just like, yeah, they're almost like kind of unseen in a way. As crazy as they are and as like over the top as they are, you kind of just don't even see them after a while anymore. And that's how Cookie Monster to me is. Like people on the show are just like, oh, he likes cookies, whatever, who cares? But when you actually like take the time to look in his eye and like see who he is and how he's feeling, like he's kind of a really sad character, you know, like when you really, and that's how when you look at other humans on the street, that's how I feel. Like there is this sadness that it's not that they want to be doing this, you know, they're just stuck in this cycle. it's my way of like empathizing with like what that must feel like, you know? So for me, I like tap into that and I try to feel what that feels like. And that's what I'm trying to get out, like express that for myself, but then express that so other people see it and they get curious about like, oh, why is this Ernie like crazy looking like this? And that starts a conversation, and hopefully people can empathize with that. And hopefully, you know, if you felt like that before, you can look at this painting and be like, oh, I felt that, and like kind of feel connected to this thing and like touched by it. And then you take the time to read the title and get curious with the caption and like kind of understand what I'm going for. Every time somebody does that, they see the painting in a different way. You know, like you end up seeing the sadness or like starting to feel that realness that is under it. You know, like I know it's a cartoon character and like it's a wacky thing, but yeah, there is like a melancholy under it and like a realness under it. You know, it's not all cartoon characters and it's not all fun. It's actually mainly not fun. There is like a very deep sadness under it, you know, or some kind of societal message, you know, about like The Simpsons is like family dynamics in a low-income household and like what that looks like, what stress that those parents are under. How does that manifest on the kids? You know, like Bart's always getting strangled by Homer when Homer's basically just stressed out, or like Bart just wants some love, and it ends up being that Homer's like strangling Bart, you know? And like as a cartoon, it's funny. And like you could paint that, like you could paint Homer strangling Bart in like a funny, crazy, wacky way with his eye popping out. But when you really like think about that, like what does that mean for us? Or what does that mean for like the way that I want to be toward my kids or something? And that's what I think about when I'm making these. Art for me is my crack in the pavement. I feel like there's other areas of my life that are just sidewalk and covered with concrete, and this is where like the tree grows, you know? It's like I could say whatever I want and be as honest as I want, and I think because it's in some kind of art form, it almost feels like safe to say certain things for me. It's still just a way of saying like, hey, here's what's going on, here's what I notice, you know, does anybody care? And I think that might be what I feel like I'm here for.